restarted a new one.
Welcome to the Lions. Hey, buddy. Come here. Come here, buddy. El gato. Kid. The handsome kid. Look at how cute he is. It's our lion mascot. You're so handsome, Mr. Kid.
Hendon Hooker. New Lions QB. What a day it is, man.
Eat, eat apples and bananas.
To eat some Hendon Hooker yards.
That was almost bad.
That was almost really bad, folks. If you don't know, you're watching this live. You're seeing Hendon Hooker is the Detroit Lions QB of the future.
Yes, sir.
Why else would they spend?
Profit.
Why else would they spend that type of pick on a dude who they don't plan on putting in the game?
I'm not trying to question Mr. Holmes, baby.
Who would question Mr. Holmes at this point?
Honestly.
Who would question Mr. Holmes? Anybody in their right mind? Would anybody in their right mind at this point? This dude just drafted as good of a quarterback as you could have got at 6, but he got an extra pick out of that, got the second best running back in the draft, and his best running back on his board for the Detroit Lions, because they didn't want Bijan Robinson, because they want more of a pass-catching guy. Plus, they get Brian Branch. Plus, they get a tight end. Plus, they get Jack Campbell, linebacker, man.
What are you gonna say?
What are you going to say about that, man? What are you going to say? What are you going to say when the Lions have 5 dudes who are all projected in the first round, man? In the first round, all 5 of those picks were projected to go in the first or early second round. That if they got them at the 31st pick, you wouldn't have batted an eyelash. 5 of those dudes, man. 5 of them. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, we had a rough break last night with the whole Devin Witherspoon at 5 and not wanting to take Jalen Carter. But with what we ended up with after 2 days, come on, man. Come on. How can you not praise that? What do you have to say about Brad Holmes?
Well, I know he likes different flavors, so we like a man with some taste, some variety, some versatility.
100%.
Yes, sir.
100%. 100%.
I'm not mad.
I'm not mad at all. I think getting the quarterback was the biggest part of this entire draft. And we got him with our fifth selection. A dude who was projected for the first round. We got him with our fifth selection in the draft, man. Like, it's Hendon Hooker. Like, if he was healthy, he would be a top 10 pick. And he's not healthy, so he's not a top 10 pick, but he's still that talented. He's still going to make that much of a difference when he's in there and he's healthy. So, getting him at, 68 or whatever, 68, getting him at 68. To also get Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, Jack Campbell, and Jahmyr Gibbs, it's like, dude, what are we talking about here? I want to hear everybody's opinion. So if you are tuned into us here, please, give us your word and let us know what you're thinking, because personally, I couldn't be too much happier with how this whole thing is played out. I mean, yes, would I have liked Devin Witherspoon? Yes. I would have loved Will Anderson. I would have loved CJ Stroud.
I would have loved Witherspoon.
She would have loved Witherspoon personally.
Personally.
But when blood starts to boil, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and piss your pants and, take a dude that's risky and maybe he doesn't pan out and you've wasted a pick and now you're down a guy in your roster? No. Brad Holmes only picks guys that he knows are going to help this football team. And that's exactly what he's done. Over and over and over for the fifth time in this draft already. For the fifth time in this draft already, he's done that again. All right, who's Cleveland on? Cedric Tillman goes. Hendon Hooker's teammate. Hendon Hooker's teammate goes to the Browns. The Browns needed a wide receiver. But you know what? I don't really care about the Browns. I want to keep talking about the Detroit Lions. Baby, what do you have to say about Hendon Hooker? If he was healthy, he's like Anthony Richardson, but with a brain.
I mean, yeah, it's a good pick. We have
Speak up.
somebody trained, somebody to back us up.
Somebody to back us up. That's going to be the major issue. God forbid, if Jared Goff goes down, anywhere between the months of November and December, we at least have a guy in Hendon Hooker where
Oh no.
he should be back.
I've been disconnected.
Hang on, I'll reconnect you. But listen, we at least have a guy now in Hendon Hooker who should absolutely be there to be a backup in the later months of the season. If something, God forbid, happens to Jared Goff, we have a dude now that can actually step in and be productive. He can move the offense. I mean, we got Jahmyr Gibbs, bro. We got Jahmyr Gibbs to run the offense. We got Jahmyr Gibbs. We got David Montgomery. We're going to have Jameson Williams coming back. God forbid if anything happened to Jared Goff at this point, we have an insurance pot. You know what the Lions just did? The Lions just basically bought an insurance. They called Progressive. The Lions just called Progressive and bought an insurance policy on their season. Where, let's not get this wrong, the NFC is as weak as it has been in decades. In decades, the NFC, and particularly the NFC North, is extremely weak. If we can use this opportunity as an advantage to get to an NFC championship game, to do something like this, all of a sudden, now, if something bad happens to Jared Goff, which, again, God forbid, we don't want to be in that scenario. But if we were in the scenario of, we're winning games, Jared Goff might not be doing exactly what he was doing last year, but our offense is still kind of rolling. Maybe Hendon Hooker at some point in the season is a guy where we can say, hey, this drives for you. Or maybe we get in the red zone and we have some, exotic packages to bring in and say, hey, you're not necessarily the starting quarterback right now, but there's still things that you can do for this football team to help us in the current moment. And that's the kind of thing where I look at this pick and I think there could not have been a more perfect pick right now for the Detroit Lions. I mean, I wanted Hendon Hooker with a third pick in the second round. I wanted Hendon Hooker with a third pick in the second round. Now you're telling me that, not only do we have Hendon Hooker, but we also have Sam Laporta, which, let's be honest, I don't think there's too many people out there. And let it be known if you are, because more props to you. But I don't think there was many people out there in the entire draft sort of circle that had Sam Laporta ranked as high as Brad Holmes did. I think Brad Holmes was in a pocket of his own drafting Sam Laporta there with that pick. I mean, because I'll tell you, I saw Sam Laporta coming up in the in kind of the thing there. I saw Sam Laporta's name coming up, but I was never thinking, oh yeah, Sam Laporta, that's the dude that we need to move up and get. And that's exactly what they did. And that's why you have to remember in all these situations that Brad Holmes and his staff is not you and your computer. Brad Holmes and his draft, his entire scouting team, his entire coaching staff, Chris Spielman and Dan Campbell, they're putting in a lot more hours than anyone else. So, if you're going to come out here and start blasting their first three picks and saying that, they reached on Jahmyr Gibbs, they reached on Jack Campbell, they reached on Sam Laporta, we don't know who Sam Laporta is, you have to take a step back and say, you know what, these guys have looked at hundreds, if not thousands of more hours of film than I did, and maybe we're actually in a good position of drafting that kind of guy. Now, real quick, I want to take a real pause because there's somebody that I want to get into this chat with me, and I'm gonna try to hook her up into this. So, is there any way that you can, give me a call back on Zoom? Is there any sort of function like that you can do there?
What are you talking about?
Like, is there a way that you can start a Zoom meeting with me? Because, look, guys, I'm going to be real honest with you. If you're watching here, I thank you very much because I spent a lot of times thinking and talking about the Detroit Lions, and I'm more than happy to have anybody maybe listen and put in their opinion up next to mine and saying, hey, we have a real thing going here. We've drafted 4 guys that have all potentially been able to go in the top 10. And in our 5th selection, here we have our quarterback. And it's almost perfect because if you think about it, it's like, well, we want Jared Goff to be the starter in 2023. But looking beyond 2023, 2024 is Jared Goff's last year under contract as a Lion. So if we can get any sort of intel on maybe another dude, especially if he's on our roster and in practice with us and with Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes every day, and say, look, this dude is going to be possibly better than Jared Goff. Let's probably give this dude a chance with his rookie contract instead of Jared Goff making $50 million a year. So that's where I'm at with that. I want to hear what you guys have to say, because honestly, I could not be more ecstatic. I would have, you know what I mean? If they would have drafted Hendon Hooker with the 18th pick, I wouldn't have been mad at that. I wouldn't have been mad at that at all. I mean, you need to get. There's been a lot of talk about positional value. Positional value. Well, you know what I want to talk to you about positional value? Is this right here. I want to talk about positional value where you're talking about the most valuable position in the game at quarterback. And you're talking about getting a dude who was projected as a top 10, maybe a top 5 pick if he were healthy. Now, he's not healthy. He's going to have to sit almost an entire season. But like I've just said, we have Jared Goff, who's doing just fine. So now Jared Goff has what you call a timer. Jared Goff has a timer, and it is going around and around and around. His timer is ticking, talking down. Because you know what? There's a timeline for Hendon Hooker to become 100% healthy. And when that timer is up and you hear that ring-a-ding-a-ling going on in the back of your ear, that means that we might have a quarterback that is very much better and more well-suited for this offense than Jared Goff. Not to mention that, let's talk about things like RPOs. I mean, he's not Jalen Hurts, but he's more than capable of running a read option every now and then, especially in big situations. The dude's got a big arm. Just showed it in what I was most impressed with watching Hendon Hooker live in Tennessee is the dude just has. He's a gamer. He's a winner. The dude's team, like, while he was healthy, was basically undefeated. They beat Alabama. Like, this dude was doing everything and more that Tennessee asked him to do in his time there. And at some point, you just have to be like, whoa, wow. I mean, what are we doing? How is it even possible that we've drafted this guy, with this late of a pick? How is it even possible? I would have never thought it would be possible to get. I mean, I thought maybe there was an opportunity. But when you really look at this stuff, like getting Hendon Hooker at this pick in particular, it's such a low risk, high reward type of situation. It's such a low risk. I mean, it's a 3rd round pick, dude. It's a 3rd round pick for a dude that was potentially supposed to go top 10. If he was healthy, there would have been probably more cases made for Hendon Hooker to go in the top 5 than Anthony Richardson. If Hendon Hooker was healthy, he potentially could have went 4th overall to the Colts, because if you want to look at his film, if you want to look at his stats, if you want to look at his win totals, this dude was head and shoulders above Anthony Richardson as a prospect, minus the injury. And what I'm saying is, people were saying, oh, well, the Lions are the perfect team to draft Anthony Richardson because they can afford for him to sit out for a year and watch Jared Goff. Well, Hendon Hooker's the exact same thing, except with him, you don't have the decision to sit him out for a year. You have to sit him out for most of his first year because he's injured. But this is something that Brad Holmes, and you know what? I know I'm talking about Hendon Hooker right now, and I'm ecstatic about Hendon Hooker. But the other thing I do want to say about Brad Holmes and his overall draft and draft philosophy is this right here. All right, year 1, took Panay Sewell, which was a rock solid first round pick, and where they got him, absolutely amazing. Can't say enough about that. Then he gets guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown in the fourth round, right? Year one just had a great draft, right? We still are kind of on the fence with Lee McNeil. And how do you even say, Levi, however you pronounce Levi's last name is what it is. But with those two guys, Lee McNeil and him, we're still on the fence a little bit about, but you can't really argue about guys like Panay Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you can pull those type of dudes out of a draft every year consistently, you're doing an amazing job as a general manager, right? Now, this year was a very weird situation, right? We get the Rams pick at 6, which Brad Holmes admitted that he was not anticipating getting that pick at 6 overall from the Rams. He was probably anticipating, a pick in the late 20s or the 30s again, like last year. With the Rams being, the powerhouse that they were, Brad Holmes and the rest of the scouting staff was not anticipating the Lions even having a 6 overall pick. But, at some point during the season, I'm sure they had to make a shift and say, all right, we're going to start evaluating harder on the guys towards the top of the draft, since it looks like the Rams are going to give us a pretty decent pick here. And it ends up being 6. Now, on top of that, I do believe it just worked out in a very, very unlucky way for the Lions at 6, because I feel like if any of those dudes, and I'll go through the entire list right now, if any of those 5 dudes, I think, were still there at 6, including Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson, the 3 QBs, plus if Will Anderson or Devon Witherspoon were still there at 6, I think that's the pick. I think the Lions pull the trigger on one of those dudes at 6. If just somebody else could have possibly jumped up into that top 6, whether it would have been Bijan Robinson or Will Levis or Tyree Wilson, or a Paris Johnson, if somebody else would have jumped up into that top 6 or that top 5 and then pushed one of the dudes who actually went in the top 5 back to 6 and gave the Lions a chance to draft one of them, I 100% think that would have been Brad Holmes' guy right there at 6. He would have pulled the trigger. But since none of them were there, I think he was like, all right, this is a perfect opportunity to trade back. We don't want to take an offensive tackle. We already have Taylor Decker and Panay Sewell. So we're now going to drop back and take somebody else in a later pick. And I guess the best offer that he got was from the Cardinals to go to 12. And the Cardinals wanted an offensive tackle, so it was kind of perfect in that regard. Plus, we get the 34th pick, which in a normal draft is only 2 picks away from being a first-round pick. So in that regard, I give Brad Holmes a lot of credit for sticking to his guns and saying, you know what, we're not really in a position right here to draft a guy that we truly value as the 6th pick. And according to what a lot of people have been saying, if just in a hypothetical scenario, if nobody would have given them a single offer for the 6th pick, they might have taken Jahmyr Gibbs at 6. And I mean, that's just based off what I've been seeing, but the fact that they were able to trade down, get Jahmyr Gibbs, and don't forget this, guys, if you haven't seen this, remember this. Brad Holmes basically said, he didn't say it verbatim, but what he basically was alluding to was the fact that he actually had Jahmyr Gibbs rated higher as a running back and as an overall prospect than Bijan Robinson. So basically what he's saying is if you would have put a gun to Brad Holmes' head, he would have basically taken Jahmyr Gibbs over Bijan Robinson in a vacuum for the Lions. And I think that makes sense based on the fact they already have David Montgomery. Bijan Robinson's basically, like a higher ceiling David Montgomery, right? They play the same sort of role as a running back. But on the other hand, Jameer Gibbs is a totally different animal. This is a blazing fast dude. Bijan Robinson isn't really much faster than your average and a current NFL running back, right? But Jameer Gibbs, on the other hand, and I don't have the exact number. I would love to be able to say it here, but I just don't have access to that on hand. But I would be willing to bet that Jameer Gibbs is like a top, like a 95th percentile on 40 times of NFL running backs. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's like, you almost want to imagine like a faster Chris Johnson, like a CJ2K, like a CJ2K 2.0. Like, you have to imagine a dude that's just got game breaking speed, right? And with the Lions offensive line, you have to, sort of respect that kind of pick. It's like, I mean, if you're gonna make holes for this dude, if he hits a hole and there's nobody at the other side of it immediately to stop him, this dude's probably gone. Jameer Gibbs is a blazer, bro. An absolute blazer. And that, I mean, what else can you really want? What else can you really want? You've already got David Montgomery, who's the bruiser, right? You got a bruiser and a blazer. And you have a top, you want to say one? At this point, with the Eagles' offensive line almost falling apart here, and they haven't done much to address that in the draft, you might be able to say the Lions have the best offensive line in the league. So it's like, when you have the best offensive line in the league, do you really want to spend too much time handing the ball off to dudes like Craig Reynolds and, whoever the hell else it would have been, like, as an extra option behind David Montgomery and Swift? And now the Swift conversation is a whole nother conversation, obviously. And honestly, it's one that's really not that important to me. It's like, you know what? It either goes one or two ways, right? Like, either they want him to be there as like an insurance policy for the running back room and as a third running back, and maybe, he can get a few snaps a game and make a few plays a game that way, of like having a very limited load. Or they're just like, this dude's not necessary anymore to have on the roster, and we'll basically just get rid of him for anything. Like, so the DeAndre Swift conversation to me is not very interesting. It's like, you know what I mean? Either Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell feel like they want him on the roster, or they don't. And I mean, at the end of the day, if they don't get rid of him, he's a third running back, a third string running back. And if they do get rid of him, it's a late round pick. So it's like, at the end of the day, is that conversation worth spending too much time on? I don't think so. But the conversation I do think is worth spending a lot of time on is, you just drafted potentially your future QBs for decades to come with your 5th selection in this draft. I mean, you've got Jameer Gibbs. You've got your, linebacker and quarterback of your defense for the future in Jack Campbell. You've got Sam Laporta, and here's how I'm thinking about the Sam Laporta pick, right? Here's how I'm thinking about the Sam Laporta pick is, if you traded basically what they did was trade Hockenson for a second or third round pick, right? They traded another pick with it, so it's hard to kind of determine the exact value of what they got back. They didn't want to pay him number one, right? They didn't want to pay him this offseason number one, right? Which makes a lot of sense based on the production value they were getting from him. You don't really want to pay a dude like that the money he's going to want, right? So at that perspective, it's kind of a good deal for both sides. Actually, for all three sides, right? Potentially with the Vikings. But more than that, you essentially, what you received in capital for him was somewhere, around a second or third round pick, right? So if you basically equate Sam Laporta, you basically, what you have to feel like this about is that the Lions view Sam Laporta as more valuable and a better player to have on the roster than TJ Hockenson, right? You would have to think that they view Sam Laporta as a better player than TJ Hockenson. And I think that's important to remember is that the Lions, I mean, there's tight ends they could have gotten the 5th, 6th, 7th round, right? I mean, they drafted this dude with a 34th pick, essentially another first round pick, right? Not too far off. Sam Laporta from Iowa. So it's like they must highly regard this dude, right? Which makes you probably think good things about him if you respect the job the Lions have done drafting in the last 3 years, including this one. But so you got Gibbs, Campbell, Laporta, and then you get Brian Branch, which is another dude that if the Lions would have taken him at 18, nobody would have really batted an eyelash. Like, so what I'm trying to say here in conclusion is the Lions have just drafted 4 dudes that they basically, or with them and, the draft community and Lions fans combined, would essentially view as like potential first round picks, right? So essentially they've taken 4 guys that could essentially have been first round picks. And then their 5th selection is a dude that, if he was healthy, would have been a top 5 or top 10 selection overall in Hendon Hooker, who I feel like they're going to just lock him in the film room while he's injured and rehab him once he's available to come out and practice. This dude is challenging Jared Goff on a week-to-week basis to be the Detroit Lions starter. And even if you're a Jared Goff guy, that's got to make you feel better about Jared Goff, right? I mean, if he's got to work every week in the game and in practice to keep his job security, I mean, how can that possibly be a bad thing? And I mean, the weird part is that Hendon Hooker is not that much younger than Jared Goff. But I mean, obviously, Jared Goff is about at the peak of his, possible potential, right? Hendon Hooker, on the other hand, is someone you might view as already being close to Jared Goff now if he was healthy, and could potentially be, a way more efficient quarterback who can run the ball, do more of the improvising and RPO stuff, and possibly even have a better arm and just be a better overall passer and leader. So as far as if you look at each pick individually in a vacuum, you might say the Lions have had a bad first 2 days of the draft. But when you look at all 5 picks together, I mean, the value they get out of all 5 of those picks together, especially when they only came in having 4 picks in the first 2 rounds. Now they get that 5th pick in the first round from the trade, and the 5th pick of the first 2 rounds ended up being Hendon Hooker, is a dude that can provide you value, maybe not necessarily this year too much, but just in the future. I think it's huge. I would love to see what everybody else thinks about that, but I think it's huge. And couldn't be happier.